Endometrium. So that's probably one question people often have is how would those be at. So endometrium would be clearly an entire layer, and the pointer would probably be spread, so to say, above the pointer. So the next thing we're going to do is go over the mammary gland. So we'll finish off the list that we have for the female anatomy. This will not be on the quiz, and but definitely on the lab exam it could be there. So one other thing, just before getting to the mammary gland, this could be on the quiz. We finished with this, but a lot of times it can be a little confusing. There's lots of regions, and when if you're asked this region on the quiz, I would probably use this exact picture where you can see it's a diamond-shaped region. There are these 4 bony landmarks, so it would be clear that this is the outer edge of this region called what?
Perineum.
Perineum. And so this diamond-shaped region is the perineum. What about the region from here to here? If it was outlined there, that is?
Vestibule.
That is the vestibule. And so if it's asked, it would be very clearly between the labia minora. And if you have this triangular region, notice it's a little bigger, that is?
Urogenital triangle.
Urogenital triangle. And so notice this one, I would definitely make sure that you see the borders of it. And so it's very clear, this triangle. And if it's the vestibule, it will be very clearly between this. I could have a sticker here, sticker there, and saying the region specifically between the tags is vestibule. And then there would be a tag here, here, and here. The region outlined by those 3 tags is urogenital triangle. And so it hopefully will be clear, so that you do need to know the boundaries of those regions. What about if you were asked this structure, this structure, this structure together make up what entire structure? The vulva. So the vulva is all of these structures together. That is the female external genitalia, the vulva. And so they wouldn't be a region. I'd ask it as an entire structure. And so that's those are some things that can be a little confusing. One last region, this triangular region there, is the anal triangle. And so we have those particular regions. These perineum and anal triangles, I mentioned the episiotomy. So, but now we'll move on to the mammary gland and the breast and the mammary gland. We have one model for this, and then the microscope's pretty good too. So we have this model, and you can see on the left you have the breast, the left breast. And then on the right, we're looking within the right breast, and we see the mammary gland. So you get the idea that the mammary gland is within the breast. And so you have the breast here, and then within the mammary gland, the breast contains the mammary gland. The gland itself is a modified sweat gland. And so this is the gland secreting the milk, and then it's located within the breast. And so this is the Book's picture, and the reason I'm showing the Book's picture is that it is a pretty good, kind of showing the breast and the mammary gland. And so then we'll get to our model in a little bit. But if we look at the Book's picture here, we can see just a little higher power of the lobules. And the lobules are the milk secreting part of the mammary gland. And so those are going to be lobules. We'll get to them on the model in a little bit, but I think the Book's picture is pretty good. And then the milk will be transported in the lactiferous duct. Our book mentions mammary duct, but we're just simplifying and calling this whole duct the lactiferous duct. And so there's a lactiferous duct, and then you have the nipple right there. And so now if we were to take the Book's picture and remove this connective tissue stroma, this would be dense connective tissue, it could also be some adipose tissue. If we remove all that, then we can see just the mammary gland part. And so now this view right there from the book is what we have in our model right there. And so we're looking right here at the mammary gland, and then we can go through what is on the list. So number 53 on the list is the nipple. And so the nipple, as you know, is where the baby will suckle. And so the baby will be getting the milk from there. And so 53 is the nipple. And then the milk will be delivered through these passageways. And you can see on the model, not as clear as in the Book's picture, but you would be asked, identify the passageway. And so this would be the lactiferous duct. Lactiferous referring to lactation. And so it's a duct, so it would be transporting the milk to the nipple where the baby will be suckling. And then within the lactiferous duct, there's a little enlargement right there. And the enlarged area there is called the lactiferous sinus. So it's just a little place where there's dilation of that duct. I would ask it probably as a space. So if it's asked as a space, then it should be pretty clear. Okay, you're asked for the sinus. Remember, a sinus is a common way to describe a space. So it should be pretty clear. Lactiferous sinus would be asked as a space. Lactiferous duct would be asked as a passageway. And so hopefully it will be pretty clear with those two. Lactiferous sinus, function-wise, you could say it stores a little bit of milk. And so there's a little area right there where a little bit of the milk can be stored in that lactiferous sinus. The lactiferous sinus stores a little milk. And yeah, the areola is going to be the pigmented area around the nipple, and it is where some oil glands are. And so its function would be to moisturize the skin or prevent drying of the skin. And so when the baby is suckling, because of the moisture, that can tend to dry out the skin, so you have the oil that will help to moisturize it. The best skin moisturizing agent is just pure oil. And so if someone has really bad dry skin, sometimes dermatologists will just say put some petroleum oil, petroleum jelly, just oil there. And so the oil glands are great at moisturizing the skin. And so, and then we have number 58 on the list is the lobules with alveoli. I wouldn't ask it so that this is the answer. And so the way I'll ask this, just so you can see, is all these little bumps there are lobules. So if you were asked, identify the specific structure here, or structure there, or structure there, that structure would be a lobule. And so when we're looking at the model, these bumps, you see lots of little bumps there, they are lobules. If a specific one would be a lobule. And then you could be asked, with the model, identify the milk-secreting structures inside. And the milk-secreting structures inside are the alveoli. And so that is how those would be asked. So you'd be asked milk-secreting structures, same spelling as the alveoli in the lung, or the alveoli in the, you remember there was an alveolus for the tooth as well. And so alveolus just means a socket or kind of a sac-like structure. When we look in the microscope, you'll see alveoli look an awful lot like the lungs alveoli. And so make sure, just so you have it, the structures that are blinking are lobules. Good. And then the milk-secreting structures inside are called alveoli. And that's so we don't see alveoli here, but when we look in the microscope, you will see alveoli, and you'll see why they are called alveoli.
Do we have to say alveoli of the breast?
What?
Do we have to say alveoli of the breast?
No, I would accept just alveoli. Yeah.
Is there functions for those that you
So the alveoli secrete milk, and but it'll be asked as here as milk-secreting structures. And so, but when we can look in the microscope, you'll actually see them, and there you'll have to know, okay, they secrete milk. And so, any other questions with those? So now we will, and then just make sure you have the passageway is what? Lactiferous duct, may be asked as passageway, and then the space is
Lactiferous sinus.
lactiferous sinus. And so I'd ask it there, so hopefully it's pretty clear what's being asked for. And one reason this is a good slide actually to look at is because it's good to know about breast cancer. So you don't need to, I won't ask it in the exam, but since breast cancer is an important disease to know about, very likely each one of us will kind of know someone who has had breast cancer or is going to have to deal with breast cancer. And when you do, kind of meet someone who just has been diagnosed with breast cancer, they often might have the pathology report. And if they have the pathology report, it's good to know what it means. And so since we're going to be looking at the breast in the microscope, you can kind of imagine a pathologist does the same thing. They look at tissue in the microscope and they look for diseases. And so if someone has breast cancer, the breast cancer will either be of the duct, which is showing here, or it will be of the lobule. And that's one thing you will recognize. It'll either be a ductal carcinoma, which would be a cancer of the duct, or it would be lobular carcinoma, That just means it's the lobule. And so when you see those words, you say, okay, it's not hard. I remember looking at those two in the microscope. And so another term you might hear about when hearing about breast cancer or other cancers is like here you have ductal carcinoma or cancer in situ. If someone has in situ and says they have in situ, that's actually good because that means the cancerous cells have not exited the duct or the lobule. And so it actually is not invasive yet. And so you'll actually hear of this term probably some point in your life, and it's good to know. In situ technically is good because they then can remove the duct. They do that by removing the breast or part of the breast. And when they remove the carcinoma in situ, they have removed the cancer. And so it's 100% that person will be fine if it's just in situ. If there is, and they're showing another picture here, you can see the lobules, you can see the ducts. You can see they have found that there are cancerous cells, but they are completely within the duct. And they would say that this is ductal carcinoma in situ. That's what the pathology report would say, and that they can just remove that and the person will be clear of cancer. However, if they look in the microscope and they see evidence of some of the cells exiting the duct, now it is cancer. Now technically this is invasive cancer. The problem is that these cells could potentially enter into the lymphatics or into blood vessels. And so that's what they're doing when they're looking in the pathology. They are looking for if these cells, any place that they find the cancerous cells, and they would look all over. And then if they say, okay, there are cancerous cells that have exited the duct, you have to worry they could go into vessels, and now you have to worry about invasive cancer. It could have spread to the lymphatics, it could have spread in other places in the body. And so that's kind of what they do when they are looking in the microscope, in something like this. When you're looking, you can kind of think pathologists do this. They look in the microscope, they look at the cancerous cell. And so what we'll be doing here is looking in the lobule, and we will, and that's where also there could be cancerous cells. Same idea, you could have it in situ, meaning it's not invasive, or it could leave the lobule and it could be invasive. And so in this, what we'll be doing, so I'm not going to ask you about breast cancer, but when you're looking at these kind of things, it's good to recognize clinically how it could be helpful later on. This is an example where I think the histology here can later be helpful. You kind of remember the lobules, you remember the ducts, you kind of say, okay, I remember those looking in the microscope. So we are looking here at a cross-section. So if you can kind of imagine looking right there, we would see lobules, and you'll see some connective tissue stroma. And so this is what we'll be looking at. And so when we are looking at this, you can see in the microscope, this is a lobule, you can see a big duct right here. And so when you're looking at this and you kind of see this, hopefully you can be oriented. We are kind of cutting through three main lobules there, a big duct there. This is connective tissue stroma. You can see a little bit of adipose tissue as well. Everyone oriented then with this kind of what we're going to be doing. And so there's actually three possible slides you could be given. You could be given a low-power inactive mammary gland, a low-power active mammary gland, or a high-power active mammary gland. You have those three circles. The difference between an active mammary gland and an inactive one is that an active mammary gland is one that is producing milk. And so only women that are pregnant or are breastfeeding would have an active mammary gland. If you are not pregnant or you are not breastfeeding, then you would have an inactive mammary gland. And so we'll be looking in the microscope at both. And so this is low power, showing the inactive mammary gland and an active mammary gland. And so then we'll start with the inactive one. What we are mostly seeing in the field of view is connective tissue. So all this light staining part is all connective tissue. We call it the connective tissue stroma. And so within the connective tissue stroma, when you look closely, you'll see some adipose tissue. And so if I look closely, or if you look in your microscope, kind of hard to see right here, but there is adipocytes, and so there's adipose tissue in there. There's also dense connective tissue in there as well. And so this is connective tissue stroma made up of dense and adipose tissue. The key thing to recognize that this is inactive is, and here we have a duct. So that's the other thing we can see, a lactiferous duct. But the key way you know this is inactive is this right there is a lobule. And so it is a very, very small lobule. This is a lobule. We go over here. This is a lobule. This is a lobule. And so you can see these lobules are very, very small. And so what happens due to estrogen, progesterone, and some other hormones, these little tiny lobules will become big lobules. And so now here, this one is an active mammary gland. And so compare this lobule, very, very small, to this particular lobule right here. And so this is a big lobule, and this is an active mammary gland, where these lobules have grown quite a bit. And it's because of the influence of estrogen, progesterone, and one other hormone that we'll talk about in the last lecture. And so inactive, active. And so we can see several lobules. They divided by some connective tissue. This is a lactiferous duct, and then this is a lactiferous duct. So we have the same lactiferous duct. There's actually a longitudinal view of it, and then this is a cross-sectional view of it. And within the active mammary gland, we see lots of specific structures called alveoli. And when you look at this, you may think it looks a lot like the lung. And so like the lung had all those white spaces which are alveoli, these also are alveoli. These are the milk-secreting structures within the mammary gland. And so we have a lobule here, and we have lots of alveoli inside, looking like the lung's alveoli. Any questions with that? So you want to be able to tell the difference between inactive and active. And then the next thing we will do is go to high power of the active mammary gland. And so this is within a lobule. I will go high power right there, and I will see something like this. And so you'd also want to recognize a high power view like this, where we're looking at alveoli. And so just to kind of orient you, we are looking right there within an active mammary gland. And so we're looking at this. And I drew my picture right here. And so we have, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 10 alveoli in the field of view. This is one alveolus. And so you can see the lumen of the alveolus right there. And so this alveolus is made up of two main cells. And so I've kind of diagrammed them right here. The cells lining the lumen are called the secretory cells. And so if I look right here, I could point right there, or I could just say identify the cell lining the lumen. That cell is called a secretory cell. The name makes sense because it produces and secretes milk. And so we are looking at the mammary gland, so we would have milk produced and then secreted by the secretory cells. And so what happens is these cells will produce, secrete milk, and then milk will be in the lumen of this alveolus. It's not going to be pushed out yet, though. And so the hormone that actually stimulates these secretory cells is called prolactin. And you'll need to know this for lecture as well. Pro meaning for, lactin, you can think lactation. So there's a hormone that is going to stimulate these secretory cells to produce and secrete milk. And so these secretory cells have receptors for prolactin. Prolactin is a hormone from the anterior pituitary, which we'll do in lecture. And so so what happens then, the secretories secrete milk into the lumen of the alveolus, and then the milk starts to collect up. As more and more milk enter into the alveolus, the wall of the alveolus will stretch a little bit, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable. And so what's going to happen then, the baby will then suckle or stimulate the nipple, and when the baby is suckling or stimulating the nipple, the posterior pituitary is going to secrete out a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is then going to stimulate these cells, these dark cells right here. We just see the nucleus of them, but they completely surround the alveolus. And what oxytocin is going to do is cause these cells, called myoepithelial cells, those cells will then contract in response to oxytocin. They're called myo because they can contract. And so these cells literally surround the entire alveolus. This is a spherical structure, and then with oxytocin, the myoepithelial cells are going to squeeze, and when they squeeze, they eject the milk out. Does that make sense? So then you can think about what happens. The prolactin is causing secretory cells to secrete milk, and then the alveolus stretches, and then there'd be a need to, okay, I should breastfeed, and then during breastfeeding, the stimulation of the nipple will, and the baby sucking, it's not the sucking from the baby that causes the milk to enter the baby's mouth. It actually is the fact that oxytocin is being secreted by the mother. That oxytocin is going to the alveoli and squeezing the alveoli, and that's going to eject the milk, so the milk will then go into the baby's mouth because it's being pushed into the baby's mouth. And so it isn't the baby actually sucking the milk, it is the myoepithelial cells ejecting the milk to go into the baby's mouth. Does that make sense? And so that is what oxytocin is going to do. So it is the breastfeeding that is going to stimulate the release of oxytocin. You may know, and we'll talk about it, oxytocin also causes the myometrium, this tissue, to contract. And so that's why some people, when they breastfeed, they may have some uterine contractions, because this oxytocin is causing the myoepithelial cells to contract. It also causes the myometrium to contract. Also, that's why if someone is about to go into labor, they can stimulate labor, you may be heard, by stimulating the nipple. And so if they want to induce labor, one thing they might suggest is to stimulate the nipple, and then by doing that you will release oxytocin, and the hope is the oxytocin will cause the uterine contractions and induce labor. And so same hormone does both. Any questions with that? So the way this would be asked, just to make sure you, this is a pretty good slide to see these cells. If you were given this, identify the specimen, and you have to be specific here. The specimen would be what? It would be mammary gland, but you'd have to say active. So we are definitely looking at an active mammary gland, because an inactive one would not have such big alveoli. Identify the entire, or the specific spherical structure at the tip of the pointer. The spherical structure is a alveolus. And the alveolus is made up of two cells. Identify the cells lining the lumen at the tip of the pointer. Secretory cells, they are stimulated by what hormone? Prolactin, good, and they are functioning to secrete and produce the milk. And then we have this kind of long black cell right there. All we're doing is looking at the nucleus of it, and that cell is the myoepithelial cell. It is stimulated by oxytocin, and its function is eject the milk, or you could say to squeeze the alveolus. And just when you're looking at the microscope, a lot of the alveoli, you won't see the myoepithelial cells, because you only see them if it just so happens the cut was through the nucleus. And so, for instance, here you can see the nucleus, here you can see the nucleus. I don't see any evidence here. It would be there, I just have the cytoplasm, so I don't see it there. A lot of alveoli, like this alveolus, I don't see any myoepithelial cell. It would be there, the cut is not through the nucleus. And so when you're looking at this one, you might not see, and sometimes hard to find, the nucleus of the myoepithelial cells. And if it was on the exam, this is a pretty good one. This is on D2L. Any questions with that? And so if you're looking at the mammary gland with this one, you either have an active or you have an inactive mammary gland. And so if you have an inactive one like this, then someone around you might have an active one. And so you want to know the inactive and the active at low and at high power. And so you won't have both. You'll have either inactive or active, and then you can share with someone else. And this is also a good slide, I think. So what I'm going to do, and actually in the Monday, Wednesday, I just got through this slide. So I'll just let the rest of the time be looking at this slide.